Welcome to everyone who is joining us. We'll get started here in another 30 seconds or so. All right, hello and welcome to our public forum on the future of drainage in the southwest corner of Altona. My name is Jordan Siemens, your deputy mayor, and I'll be hosting the forum here tonight. As with many areas of life these days, we are engaging the public virtually instead of in person, so thank you for being a part of this. Tonight, we'll be starting with a presentation by Matt Fisher from J.R. Cousins Consultants, who we contracted to study the drainage in the southwest corner of town, to identify issues, to identify the causes of the issues, and to identify possible solutions. If you have not already sent in questions via email, you will have the opportunity to ask questions either during the presentation or after by commenting on the YouTube live stream. After his presentation is done, we will start with questions already sent in from the public and then move to questions generated during the presentation. As mentioned, I'll be hosting the questions, giving answers on behalf of council if applicable, but more likely deferring to Matt to answer the engineering questions. Also available with us is our town CAO, Dan Gagne, our public works manager, Clint Dirksen, and several of the rest of the council team. As mentioned before, J.R. Cousins has been hired to identify issues and solutions. The plan being presented today is not set in stone, budgeted for, or given timelines. The purpose of tonight is to provide the same information that council has received to the public and to receive feedback from our residents regarding the solutions proposed by J.R. Cousins. We'll then take that feedback and start developing more formal plans of action to move forward. And with that, I'll hand things over to Matt. Please remember that if you have questions or comments, you can send those to us by typing them into the comments section below the video. Matt?
Thank you very much for having me. I'm going to start by sharing my screen and get right into a presentation. Let's see if this works okay. Can you guys see my screen okay? It should have the kind of drainage study with a couple different options. Okay, so just to kind of give a kind of brief overview of what we looked at. We've looked at specific drainage catchment areas within 4th Street Southwest. And this first plan that I'm providing shows the general catchment areas of each section. So as you can see in the yellow, you should be able to see my mouse. This section of yellow all drains towards the south end of 4th Street Southwest. It goes through an existing culvert that goes through an existing berm into a ditch that runs along the south property line. Right now it drains west towards Road 5 and then follows this red catchment area north along Road 5, eventually enters Center Avenue ditch, and then gets into this existing creek kind of west of the development. So we're going to start off with kind of talking about some of the drainage areas in the yellow catchment area, and then I'm going to move to the blue and the red after. So as I'm sure a lot of people joined today understand, during rainfall events of different intensities, we get a lot of ponding, both in the existing ditch along the south property line, and then we also get ponding, a significant amount of ponding right on the intersection of Martin Crescent and 4th Street Southwest. So we were asked to review this area for drainage and come up with a couple alternatives to discuss. And then ultimately, we have a recommended option that we've presented and that'll be presenting tonight. So in looking at this overall drainage, once again, speaking about the yellow catchment only, I'm going to drag a report that we had done that was finalized in September 2020, 4th Street Southwest, the drainage feasibility study. And I want a couple of the key items that I'd like you to kind of note is the total amount of drainage that we're expecting, or the total amount of water flow that we're expecting during different type of rainfall events. So during a 5-year rainfall event, we're expecting 0.688 cubic meters per second. 25-year rainfall event, 0.947, and then you get the idea as we get into more intense rainfall events. Now, just as a general note, a 1 in 5-year rainfall event is the frequency of it is expected to, I guess, happen once every 5 years. So not to say that it won't happen, once every 10 years, or it might happen twice in 1 year, just looking at the frequency based on past records that we had. So with that in mind, if we're looking at a 1 in 5 year rainfall event for this yellow section, we're expecting 0.688 cubic meters a second. Now, one of the key things that we looked at kind of right off the bat to determine, what the potential issue was we looked at this culvert that crosses through the existing berm just south of 4th Street Southwest, getting into this ditch along the south property line. Let me just drag it over so you can see both. So this is the first point that we looked at, that specific culvert. When we looked at the capacity of that culvert, before the road floods, this is a really key number, we can get 0.121 cubic meters a second. So what's important to understand is the culvert allows you to get 0.121 cubic meters a second. However, a peak flow that we're expecting during just a 1 in 5 year rainfall event is 0.688. So almost 6 times the amount of flow is coming to that culvert that's allowed to actually get through it. That definitely sets off some red flags. I don't think that's a surprise to anyone that knows that area and knows how frequently we get flooding at that location. But that kind of verifies what we already understood. As I kind of keep going on, and we looked at this existing ditch, the flow through this existing ditch as it gets past this culvert, assuming we're able to get kind of full flow, is 0.792 cubic meters a second. So if I go back to the table, that ditch has a capacity for about a 1 in 5 year rainfall event, but anything past that, a 1 in 25, a 1 in 50, and a 1 in 100 year rainfall event, it will not have capacity for the amount of water that comes through. So I think what that points out is how it basically looks at the drainage, the issues that you guys are having, and confirms that with the numbers that we're seeing. As we get kind of continue to the west, we go through another set of culverts, once again under capacity, and then eventually we get up to Center Avenue. So that points out certainly the issues that we're having. Now, in terms of looking for a solution, we've looked at a number of different options. Some of those options include a detention ditch, which is basically a retention pond on let's say a neighboring property to the south, or somewhere that we could get some property. What that basically does is all the water flows into the ditch, and then we release it from the ditch at a lower rate, so the ditch is able to kind of take the total amount of flow. That has a small-ish, or a small relative upfront capital cost. Very little maintenance and kind of operation issues, but you also have to deal with getting that property, or getting that land to put the retention pond. The next option that we looked at was a bit of a, I guess, a far-fetched option. It was looking at underground detention in that town-owned property just south of 4th Street Southwest. This type of option is good for big cities and downtown areas where space is limited, but doesn't suit this specific area in terms of cost or feasibility very well. And then the last option that we looked at, I guess the second last option before we get into the recommended option, was a potential lift station at that location where we would pump the water across the berm into the ditch. That also had a high upfront cost based on the amount of flow that we had talked about. That's 0.688 cubic meters a second. We're talking about a very significant size pump. And from a maintenance and operation and capital cost perspective, it didn't make sense. So then we got into our preferred option, which, as I scroll down one more slide, is shown on this plan. So I think a couple of key notes in our proposed solution is it's a phased approach. And what we want to see in each of these phases is that the initial phase is providing the benefit that we're hoping for before we move on to the next phase. So in phase 1, the plan would be to dig a ditch across from Road 5 directly west to meet up with this existing creek. The idea of this would be to not have Road 5, the north end of Road 5, surcharged or it's under capacity, as we talked about. And then it also alleviates some of the water that's going to Center Avenue, which we'll talk about in a couple of minutes. So like I said, phase 1 was to increase the size of these 2 culverts and construct a ditch in between the creek and Road 5. I'll show you on another set of plans generally what it would look like. Starting at the ditch, we would tie into the ditch, or starting at the creek rather, we tie into the creek, dig a ditch all the way to Road 5, upgrade these culverts. Right now, as I said, they're under capacity. And then if we continue along towards the left and then go to the bottom side of the screen, this is the edge of those culverts. And then we'll continue east all the way past 4th Street Southwest and go right to the end of the existing ditch. The plan would be to widen this ditch to provide additional capacity. So that is talking about phase 1. Phase 2, I touched on just a little bit. It would be widening this ditch all the way to the end of the field. The intent of that would be, once again, to upgrade or increase capacity of our stormwater catchment. So we would look for phase 1. We would maybe do that at an initial phase, understanding that these culverts are causing a bottleneck. And once we put these culverts in and construct this ditch, that should alleviate some of this bottleneck right at this point as it enters the culvert. Then phase 2 would be to widen this ditch. And what we'd want to see is that during rainfall events, this ditch has capacity. So it would be, you would have a small amount of ponding or small amount of water heading through it. But it would not be constricted by these existing culverts, since we would have upgraded them. What we would see after phase 1 and phase 2 is that we would still have ponding on 4th Street Southwest, because as we talked about, this culvert doesn't have the capacity to send enough water that's coming to this intersection into this ditch. But what we'd want to do is make sure that this ditch was all working properly. I guess one kind of important thing to note is when we're designing drainage systems, we're using a set, the 1 in 5 year rainfall event or 1 in 25 year rainfall event that has been modeled over reviewing a number of different rainfall events over the last number of years. But as we know, every rainfall event's a little bit different. So what we're trying to do is come up with a solution that we can test over time based on different types of rainfalls and make sure that it's performing the way it's supposed to. One other caveat that we need to note is when we're designing drainage systems, we have to assume that the downstream end has the capacity to take the water that we're sending to it. If this creek is completely surcharged and we're trying to send a whole bunch of water to it, it's not going to work and it's going to back up into this ditch. So during this phased approach, what we're going to see is, okay, now phase 1 and phase 2, these ones are working properly. Now we want to remove this berm, which I know some people might have some questions about, and that is completely understood. Right now, as we've shown, the culvert through the berm does not have capacity, but I know there's been questions about what happens if there's a major overland flooding and we've gotten rid of this berm. So I just certainly wanted to address that. Right now, there's a berm that kind of goes all the way behind these houses, and the intention would certainly be to not touch that existing berm. All we would be doing is cutting a small portion of that berm out to allow water from 4th Street Southwest and Martin Crescent to get through there into the ditch and then ultimately into this creek. What we've talked about as a solution to potential overland flooding is not cutting out a huge amount of that berm, just enough that we need, like I talked about, and then have backup solutions for temporarily damming that opening if we saw the potential for overland flooding. We certainly don't want to put residents at risk by cutting this berm open, but we have to understand that if we keep it the way it is and we keep that existing culvert, we won't be able to get the amount of water that we need to off of 4th Street Southwest. So we need to improve that, but with the idea that we'll have a backup plan if overland flooding were to happen. I think that's everything that I've got just kind of in terms of the south portion of 4th Street Southwest. Talked about phase 1. Phase 2 was widening the ditch, and then phase 3 is ultimately removing a section of this berm and getting rid of that culvert. Have there been any questions that have come in on that, or Jordan, would you like me just to keep going on the next phase, and we're going to do all questions at the end?
Yep, let's roll along for now, and then we'll get to any at the end if they come in.
Very good. So certainly welcome any questions that everyone might have on that.
Maybe if I'll just jump in case anyone has joined us since the live stream started, the way to submit your questions is to comment on the YouTube video below the video itself.
Fantastic. Okay, moving right along to the north section of 4th Street Southwest. So we're going to talk about this blue shaded area first of all. So we talked about just the yellow shaded portion that drains to the south. This blue shaded portion drains to the north and eventually gets to Center Avenue, then makes its way west along Center Avenue to that same creek that we're talking about. And then along the way meets up with this portion of red catchment that also makes its way to Center Avenue. So the same kind of thing has been understood and witnessed over a number of years. We know that during rainfall events we have major flooding along 4th Street Southwest, the intersection, specifically the intersection at Center Avenue. And what that does is that causes water to back up all the way along 4th Street Southwest. So once again, we have looked at these numbers. Here's another report that we had put together, 4th Street Southwest Drainage Study. I'm gonna go in a little bit. If you're interested, feel free to read some of the background information on it. But I think some of the key aspects that everyone's gonna be interested in, once again, would be the amount of flow that are coming. So we've subdivided some of this blue area, and I want you to focus on S1 and S2, basically the east portion of 4th Street Southwest, and then the west portion, that's S2. So if we look at S1 and S2, we've got during a 1 in 5 year rainfall event, we're expecting 1.455 cubic meters a second from S1 and 1.855 cubic meters a second from S2. So combining those, we're looking at around 3.3 cubic meters per second. When we look once again at the culvert capacity along Center Avenue, we've got one 970 by 1390 culvert at each of the road crossings and approaches. And when we look at the capacity of each of those culverts, we are about 1/3 of the overall volume of water that comes out during a 1 in 5 year rainfall event. So the capacity of those culverts is 1.077 cubic meters a second. And like I said, we're expecting about 3.3 cubic meters per second. So that tells us that the ditch along Center Avenue, let me get back to my plan. The ditch along Center Avenue does not have adequate capacity for the amount of water that's coming to it. So what you, I'm sure, have seen during large rainfall events is that this ditch is completely full, backed up, and bottlenecking at a number of these different culverts along the way, which does not allow water from 4th Street Southwest to get into the ditch. So that's the first problem that we've run into. The second problem that we've run into is how the water actually comes off of 4th Street Southwest. On the east side, it runs through a kind of a curb cut into an existing ditch, and then through two culverts that run across 4th Street Southwest, once again, undersized. And then the water from the west side of 4th Street Southwest flows in through a kind of a manhole catch basin into, I guess, through a culvert into the existing ditch. And once again, unfortunately, it does not have the capacity. So what we've seen, I guess, the couple different issues that we've run into is the water can't get off of 4th Street Southwest quick enough, which causes the backup, as I'm sure everyone has seen during these large rainfall events. And then once it actually gets off the road, now you've got backup in this ditch. So we've got a couple of things that that we need to improve on at this north end as well. So looking at different options, this one was a little bit more straightforward in terms of options. Basically, we need to get it into the ditch faster. So looking at phase 1, the plan would be to reconstruct a portion of this 4th Street Southwest. It's got minimal grade and certainly can be improved upon, especially at this intersection where we'd want to increase the size of this culvert that crosses the road at 4th Street Southwest and Center Avenue, and also improve this road to allow water to get to that intersection faster. So that is phase 1, basically gets into the ditch faster. One other thing that we'd point out during phase 1 is, since we have such a large volume of water, if we get it off the road faster, we're still constrained at a couple of these first culverts. So the proposal, the recommended solution would be to widen this ditch as well, such that when it comes off the road, it's got more capacity to sit in the ditch as it starts to fill up. Phase 2 and phase 3 are very similar approaches. So essentially what our recommendation would be is to add more culverts at each of these approaches and road crossings. It's as simple as the existing culvert doesn't have the capacity for the amount of flow, so we need to increase that. Now, if we're looking at phase 2, by adding one additional culvert at each of these approaches, we're essentially taking the existing ditch, which does not have the capacity for even a 1 in 5 year rainfall event, and increasing that capacity to a 1 in 5 year rainfall event. Then in phase 3, we would add a second new culvert, so there'd be 3 total at a couple of these key intersections. That would now increase the total amount of flow. So during a 1 in 25 year rainfall event, the ditch would have capacity. So it's important to note that the solutions that we're recommending will absolutely improve the drainage in this area. However, if you were to get a 1 in 50 year, 1 in 100 year rainfall event, unfortunately, these solutions would not cover that. We would still have some of the ponding and backup that you're currently experiencing, but from a kind of a design perspective, what we would typically design for would be a 1 in 25 year rainfall event. Designing for anything higher than that becomes unfeasible in terms of cost. So I think what we're saying is we need to improve this area, because right now, during those 1 in 50 or 1 in 100 year rainfall events, we'll have a lot of difficulty. By increasing the amount of culverts, we will certainly reduce that amount of ponding that'll happen during those major rainfall events. I don't think I've got anything further. Jordan, you know what, I might show one last, actually, no, sorry, I got 2 more things to show. So these are just a couple of the solutions that we looked at previously, and those are the catchments. I wanted to find this plan. I jumped over it. So essentially, this plan is showing what we are hoping to, what our recommended solution would be, and how it will lower the water level, expected water level. So by adding these culverts during a, let's say, 1 in 5 year rainfall event, if you compare these 2 numbers, we're reducing the amount of potential ponding by 6 to 12 inches during those major rainfall events during a 1 in 5 year, and then during a 1 in 25-year rainfall event will also be reducing the water levels, the expected water levels in the ditch. Lastly, I know that cost is of course very important for these solutions. Starting off on the one we just talked about, the Center Avenue upgrades, the phase 1 approach included the upgrading of 4th Street Southwest. Phase 2 was adding more culverts in the ditch, and phase 3 was the same. The estimated total cost for phase 1, 2, and 3 was $621,000. If we look at the other alternative, maybe for those who are joining a little bit late, I'll just go over it very quickly. The other alternative was the south portion of 4th Street Southwest, and the phased approach was to install another ditch that goes to the creek, upgrade these culverts, widen this existing ditch, and then ultimately remove the culvert that crosses this berm to allow additional flow through there. So with that, we've got a 3-phase estimate of around 193,000 with each of the phases broken up. Jordan, if I could pass it back to you, have we received any questions during that presentation?
Absolutely. Thank you, Matt. Yeah, so we have several questions that we received via email ahead of time. So I think we'll start with those. I know you addressed some of them during your presentation. We'll just go over them again briefly. And then there were a couple of questions that came in while the presentation was going on. So the first question was that from the notice we received, it seems that the project does not include the drainage problem at Sunflower Crescent and 4th Street, that after heavy rains and during spring thaw, it's at times not possible to cross at Sunflower Crescent onto 4th on foot. Why is this not being addressed? I think I was just largely all the detail couldn't be placed on the notice that went out, but maybe you can just address that here.
Absolutely. I think that's a really important question, because even during my presentation, I'm really focusing on the intersection of 4th Street Southwest and Center Avenue and the ditching along Center Avenue. And that's because that's where the major issue is. But the question's a very good one. Once we alleviate some of this ponding at the intersection, what's happening is the ponding is backing up all the way down 4th Street Southwest and causing issues downstream. Let me pull up my overall plan. So it's not just ponding right at this intersection, it's ponding all the way along 4th Street to whatever that water level is based on the total amount of rainfall. So it is expected that there would be significant ponding all the way along 4th Street that would be alleviated with these potential solutions.
Right. So would you, in your study, would you have taken grades along that road, like, or we just know that the water would run if there was capacity for it to run away?
We've certainly taken grades. I don't think it's any surprise that the grade is minimal in Altona, and that's kind of understood. It's what we've got to work with. But there is adequate grade to move water from the kind of south end, the high point, all the way to Center Avenue. There's adequate grade and positive grade all the way along that street. The issue becomes this intersection doesn't have enough capacity to get off the road, first of all, and then once it gets off the road, it's restricted in the ditch.
Right. So if you lived in Scotland, the intersection wouldn't be a problem because they're so flat. If it can't lead through the intersection, it just backs up the rest of the way.
Correct.
Jordan, Jordan, can I jump in here?
Yeah.
I think the question also reflected that that they have water sitting in that intersection in spring. And what's happening is the streets, they move from spring, summer, and winter. They're shifting in those streets. And what happens is that intersection actually becomes a little lower. People see that normally on manholes in the street. They'll often stick out further, and people think that the manholes are moving, but it's not the manholes, it's the streets that shift. and that causes some of that ponding in springtime, and that's usually goes away by the middle of summer. It's not ponding there as much, not nearly as much, because the streets go back to the level that they should be, but they do shift. So that there's always that issue, and there's not the grade on that street is little in that area, and that's why that ponding happens in springtime.
Right, thank you, Harv. So our next question that we had ahead of time then was regarding the south project. Phase 3 involves the removal of the berm and the culvert south of Martin Crescent. I recall that this entire dike was built in the late 70s after this entire corner of town flooded badly due to overland water escaping Buffalo Channel. If you now remove this berm, will flood mitigation not be compromised in the event of overland water from the south? And again, Matt, you did address this. Let's just go through it briefly one more time.
You bet, and I think that's a really important question as well. Is when we excavate this this berm, there's certainly going to be some anxious people kind of watching that and wanting to know that during some of these flooding events we won't have created an issue. So I think it's important to note that the phased approach that we talked about, we're looking for keys in each phase to then move on to the next phase. So we're looking for the water. Once we get these upgraded culverts done, we're not looking for we don't want to see water kind of at this culvert anymore. And so what that cues us is, okay, now that this culvert is upgraded, we've now increased the capacity. Now water can actually drain the way it's supposed to towards the west. And then certainly when we get to this removal of the berm, we want to make sure that everything's working properly. Also, like I said, we are designing based on rainfall events. Typical rainfall events happen, during the summer months, and not exactly at the same time as major flooding events. So we're talking about kind of two different things. During a spring flood, for example, it's not going to happen instantaneously and catch us completely off guard. There's a very good chance that we'll know that overland flooding is happening long before it becomes a kind of a disastrous level, which allows us to make precautions to close in that berm temporarily to protect those houses and residents.
Right. So the maybe analogy here would be similar to Morris Dike and Highway 75, that there's an exit point through there. When if there's going to be a flood, then you just fill it up temporarily.
Mm-hmm. That's exactly right.
Okay.
And we don't want to. Sorry, just to kind of touch on that point, we don't want to stop, good drainage during these rainfall events for the whole summer, just because we're concerned about some spring flooding.
Right. Harv, I'm not sure. Are you or Clint or Dan, are we aware when the last time we would have had overland flooding where that dike would have come into effect? Like, as the resident mentioned, it was back in the 70s. Have we had much since then? Do we think water patterns have perhaps shifted as well?
97 flood was the last time that dike that I remember was used. The drainage system west of Road 5 has been changed after the 97 flood to alleviate some of that water that came towards the southern part of town there. So that dike definitely has its purpose, but things have changed after that flood, even further down the Buffalo Creek, to alleviate pressure. And so I don't know if that dike has actually the water has been used properly after the 97 flood.
Sounds good. Thank you. Then I think we'll stick to questions for the south side for now. The question, I'm not sure exactly which resident wrote this. I don't know whose property to be addressing, but it was asking, do I have to worry about getting flooded out if we have a 3-inch rainfall when you cut the berm? I don't know, Sarah, if you would be aware of where that would be coming from exactly.
Yeah, and I guess my response to that would be, I would be more so worried about you getting flooded out on the upstream side of the berm if it's still there, as opposed to if the berm was gone. I think what we're showing with these 3 phases is we're trying to get the water away from this intersection as quick as possible, and that will in fact help during that major rainfall event as opposed to the opposite. We are increasing the size of this ditch, so it's not like we're just moving the water from the road, which is of course a high priority. It gets shut down a number of different times during rainfall events, but we'd be not just shifting the water off the road into the ditch, but we'd actually be getting it through the ditch into the creek.
Right. Okay, so I'm going to, I think, shift to some questions more for the south side, and there's some generic questions as well that I'll maybe get to towards the end. Question is, if 4th Street is regraded, does that mean the ramp up to Center Avenue will be steeper? If so, not a problem most of the year, except in winter when the intersection is slippery. Maybe Clint or Dan, you could address that.
No, it wouldn't be steeper. We're talking about redoing the road and talking about lifting up that end actually, so it would be flatter. To get those bigger culverts underneath, I think we'd need more room, so the road would inherently be higher.
Right. So there's more room for the water to get underneath the road, but actually going to Center Avenue would be a more longer gradient, slower gradient to access that.
Correct.
Okay, thank you. Then I think I'll go up here. Question kind of maybe on a broader perspective. Were rainwater harvesting options considered? Can hard surfaces be removed to reduce runoff? That'll be maybe directed to Matt.
I would say we haven't looked at those too closely because this is an existing subdivision. So, if we were going to look at a brand new subdivision, that would be certainly a good alternative. But we're kind of working with the water that's coming at us from this existing subdivision as it is right now. It's a great point and certainly a good comment. But I don't see a huge location that we could potentially remove some of the hard surface. The point of what the person's asking is, if it's not a hard surface, then it's got some of the water's got potential to drain into the ground and not get onto the street and cause the overland flooding. So it's a good point. The problem once again is this an existing subdivision? It's fully, it's developed. Even the lots would have been properly graded, which means that when you're building your house, you want to get water off the lots and onto the street as quick as possible. So even on the grassed lots, whatever is left within the subdivision is not retaining a significant amount of water.
All right. Then I had another question here. That kind of ties into that actually. The question was, has future residential expansion to the south been accounted for in this planning process?
The answer to that question is no. We have discussed a potential future subdivision to the south, and so if we were designing this brand new subdivision again, we're obviously working with what we've got at this point. But the requirements of a brand new subdivision would be to have their own stormwater retention. And that requirement comes from government, Manitoba Conservation and Climate. They say that the water that leaves the site needs to be restricted to a 1 in 5 year rainfall event during a 1 in 25 year rainfall. So basically, you're having to pond it. Typically in a residential development, it's in a retention pond. So we would expect that any future residential subdivisions would have their own water retention to deal with this, and thus it wouldn't be causing an issue.
So as we're seeing here, the drainage plan really for this development was inadequate. Regulations and oversight has changed, and new developments would not be facing the same issue.
That's accurate.
All right, so gonna just scan through our questions here again. This is, what is the question of doing what is the value of doing this project in phases? What does this mean for financial implications? Maybe I'll let Matt talk about that a little bit, and then maybe we'll get Dan jump in as well in terms of like how much budget we would generally have per year to work on projects like this. I'll let Matt start.
Yeah, you bet. So the major advantage to doing it in phases is you, and I think I kind of touched on it a little bit, but certainly can again, is that we want to see how each of the phases operates before we go into a next phase. So we can show that what we're seeing on paper, and keep in mind we're modeling it, as a hydraulic analysis. We're calculating the amount of runoff through culverts. But realistically, what we want to see in real life is that the solutions that we're coming up with are actually benefiting the overall drainage pattern. So, for example, if we did phase 1 and we continued to have a ton of extra ponding in that ditch, the conclusion would be, well, the creek doesn't have adequate capacity for this project, in which case we need to change our focus to looking at maybe the capacity of this creek instead. But by doing it as a phased approach, we can feel better about our solution as opposed to doing it all at the same time.
And then Dan, maybe you could address how much we generally use for infrastructure on an average year compared to a total cost here of $800 and some $1,000.
Yeah, well, prior to this year, like this year, we've done a tremendous amount of work and we're borrowing for it. So more often than not, we had been restricting ourselves with the gas tax money we had. So we had a budget of $230,000-ish a year is kind of what we were reserving for infrastructure projects. Currently, our drainage budget is, I think, $15,000 or $20,000 a year. So those are the kind of numbers we're dealing with right now. And seeing as we've done quite a bit of road work this year, we see an opportunity of being able to use maybe the gas tax money in the next few years to pay off the debenture of the road construction, and then with the balance maybe to attack some of this work, and also maybe doing some more minor repairs to roads within Altona and not necessarily looking at new construction. So there's an opportunity. Again, it's the will of council to determine where the budget gets allocated. But I think the way the project has been phased out, there are definite pieces there that are achievable within a year's budget, and maybe a couple phases within one budget year. So that was, I think, one of the appeals was to piece this out in a way that we could probably attack this in a few years.
Right. So, like for an analogy, the downtown drainage project doesn't really work in phases, but it's $1.5 million to $2 million project, and so it's taken a long time until resources were ever in place to get to it. The benefit of a phased approach is we can actually start working and tackling this project a little bit at a time instead of waiting another 10 or 20 years to do that.
Yeah, Matt is very aware about our preference for phasing. A lot of our projects, bigger projects, have been done in phases. Our lagoon that was a 3-phase project. And like you said, the downtown drainage, you can't really do in phases. Everything was necessary in one shot to make that system effective. So that's exactly right.
All right, we've had good participation so far. I got, I think, one more question here. How are you going to get the water to flow faster to the west on a meager rainfall as the slope is very little?
I'm assuming we're talking this south ditch. I guess we're talking about both essentially.
Probably could be either or.
Yeah. So the grade of the ditch doesn't change when we're looking at kind of hydraulics of drainage. I won't get into all the borer details for it, but essentially what we're doing to increase the capacity is we're widening the ditch. So if you think about a really narrow, let's say a V-shape ditch, that would have way less capacity than, actually got a little bit of a sketch, than this wider ditch that has a 2.5 meter ditch bottom and 4-to-1 slope. So we're not increasing the grade by making it go faster. We're stuck with the grades of what we've got. We can, try and improve when we're ditching it a little bit more. But we're stuck with the grades that we've got. But we can widen the ditch, which increases the capacity of that ditch as a whole.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Matt, for joining us tonight and presenting it. If people have any further questions in the future or that didn't get brought up today, you can please happily talk to Dan or Clint, contact the town office. They'd be happy to talk to you about this project. And we will keep this corner of town addressed with phases as they go into place. Like I mentioned at the beginning, we don't have anything budgeted or a timeline set for a project like this. The first steps are to gather feedback from the community to start planning on what our next phases will be. What I like about this plan is it's fairly simple. It's not necessarily not costly, but it's simple and clear, and it's laid out in a way that we can start tackling it as we are able. So again, thank you everyone who has joined us. We really appreciate you tuning in and participating, and we look forward to more interaction in the future. Thanks again.